Right now, closing arguments underway in the murder trial of a young mother named Lacey Spears. She's accused of poisoning her 5-year-old son with salt. Spears' defense team did not call a single witness to the stand. Prosecutors say Spears fed her son toxic amounts of sodium through a stomach feeding tube. But the defense is attempting to show there were other possible causes for the child's death. Let's bring in Anahita Sadagatfar, a criminal defense attorney. Dan Schorr is a former prosecutor. Dan, I know that you prosecuted cases in Westchester County where this case is being heard here in New York. You say that it is not an intentional murder case, but the penalties are still the same. Explain what you mean.
Right. The charge is depraved indifference murder, which is still murder in the second degree, just like intentional murder in New York. The theory is that you did something with such recklessness that you disregarded other human life and caused the death of someone else. So what they're saying is that this mother introduced sodium into her son in a manner that was depraved, that showed disregard for his life and led to his death, but that she didn't necessarily want to kill him. The prosecution's theory is that she was doing this for attention. She publicized her plight on social media, and she got a lot of attention for it, and it led to her death. So it's depraved indifference murder, the same penalty, up to 25 to life, as intentional murder in New York, but it's a different part of the penal law.
And Anahita, the defense did not call a single witness to the stand. They challenged all of the prosecution witnesses pretty thoroughly, but they didn't put on anybody in defense. Is that risky?
Yes, John, I think not calling a single defense witness is not only risky, but it's extremely bold. But you have to believe that this was just a well thought out strategic decision by the defense. And I think the message they wanted to send to the jurors is that the prosecution has so utterly failed to meet their burden of proof that we don't even need to put on a case. We don't even need to call any witnesses. And certainly the judge will instruct those jurors that the burden of proof rests solely with the prosecution. The defense has no requirement to put on a defense. But having said all of that, John, I still think ultimately jurors want to hear from the defense. They want to hear from defense witnesses. They want to hear from defense experts. They want to hear the counter arguments. So I'm not quite sure this was the best decision in this case.
Let's talk about some of the evidence, though circumstantial, that the prosecution does have, Dan. Little Garnett died during a visit to the hospital. Her side, the mother's side, has said, look, he died while he was in the hospital, and therefore he was getting good medical care, but he died after his mother was seen on videotape taking him into a bathroom. His feeding tube was in place. Then she emerges from the bathroom with the little boy. He lies down in bed and starts going into convulsions that ultimately killed him. Pretty good circumstantial evidence there, wouldn't you say, Dan?
There's a lot of powerful circumstantial evidence. In addition to what you just talked about, her taking him into the bathroom, and that's on videotape, and then he emerges. He had been fine before, and then his sodium level spikes. He has to be airlifted to another hospital, and he dies tragically 4 days later. But also, the mother allegedly reached out to a neighbor to go into their home to retrieve bags of salt and feeding bags with sodium content in them before the police could get to them. So that's also pretty powerful evidence. She also made some online searches for the dangers of sodium. All this together paints a very damning picture of what she's accused of doing, which is intentionally putting sodium into her son's body and causing him to be sick and ultimately die.
But the defense, Anahita, says, she also Googled for information on potassium poisoning or pinworms and other things. Is that enough to bring reasonable doubt into the jurors' minds? It only takes reasonable doubt in one mind, really,
exactly,
to end at least in a hung jury and maybe a new trial.
It may or may not be, but the fact is I don't agree with the defense decision not to even call any witnesses to bring that additional evidence in. But I do agree with the fact that the defense did not put the defendant on the stand, because that too is a very risky move. And to put a criminal defendant on the stand, John, I think you only do that when you feel you absolutely have to. And when there is all of this damning evidence that the co-panelists just mentioned, we have that surveillance video of her walking into the bathroom bathroom with her son with that attachment to the feeding tube. We know the son got very sick right after that. And then you have the testimony of the friend saying that the defendant asked her to go and take that bag out of her house and hide it before the police got to it. I mean, she would get destroyed on cross-examination. So I actually agree with the defense not putting her on the stand.
Well, the defense has issued its final closing arguments. Prosecution arguments are up next right after lunch. We will continue to keep an eye on this case, let our viewers know what happened. Thanks, both of you. Anahita Sadagatfar, Dan Schorr. See you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.